Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Jennifer Schmid, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I'm from this little place called Benicia, and whenever I can, I try to have folks who live in my hometown on, especially when they do incredible things. Jennifer is one of these people. She's been a pioneer doing things that are traditionally male-dominated. You could say you worked in shipping, but really that doesn't describe, the kind of work you did. And you also broke into and have done very well as a firefighter. Let's just back up. And before you start, and there's also this fantastic university that doesn't get nearly enough credit. So let's make sure we say something about Cal State Maritime, which is in Vallejo, and talk about the incredible education. Did you know what Cal State Maritime was before you went there?
No. So in fact, it wasn't a state school when I went there. It was a private college, and I had just honestly never heard of it. I lived in Sacramento. I started getting these brochures in the mail, and I have no idea how I got on this mailing list. But I was kind of wondering at the time where I was going to go to college, and I saw these brochures, and it just struck me that, this is exactly what I want to do. Kind of a pseudo-military environment. I felt like at the time I needed some structure in my life, so went there, visited the campus, and got in. So it was pretty exciting for me.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of a ocean-based VMI or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a military academy, but not really. It is really a very, very unique place.
Yeah, it is. And it's exactly what I needed. It was pretty small at the time. There were maybe 400 students, which was just perfect for me. That's what I needed at that time. And met a lot of great people that have been friends for life. It's especially with that small environment. And we went on 3-month training cruises every year. So out at sea, foreign ports, going to, South America was one cruise. Australia was another. The Orient was another cruise. Just amazing training and great atmosphere.
I have a lot of questions about all of this stuff. I also want to mention, he's working on coming in, but Eric Hoglund is the guy that connected us. And Eric is a big supporter of Save the Brave and Estey Realty and all these. And we just love him. His computer is not working right. So he's going to pop in when he can, if he can. But I want to make sure we don't go further without mentioning Eric's good work and his fantastic support of the show and everything else. Big support of the Break It Down show. The Cal State Maritime thing, are you wearing uniforms? And then what the heck does a school ship do when it goes to all the way across the Pacific Ocean? What do you, I know you're probably practicing doing ship stuff, but help us fill in the blanks.
Right. So in fact, I went to school with Eric. That's how we met. But yeah, so you get two things when you graduate from the academy. You have a bachelor's degree, and you can choose what that could be in. And then you get a license in the Merchant Marine. So I chose the deck route. There's also an engine route. So the deck route, when you get a license, you get a third mate's license in the Merchant Marine, which puts you as the lowest ranking officer on the bridge. Or if you're on an oil tanker, you're, transferring oil and, product kind of cargo. You can work on container ships. You can work on tugboats. So a lot of options when you graduate. But you also get that bachelor's degree. So it's kind of a double whammy and an exciting options for an 18-year-old to go into. So yeah, when you go out on the ship as a freshman, you're just kind of learning the ropes. You're learning how the ranking system works. You're doing the more menial duties on the ship, which involve usually, cleaning. But you're also getting training with, just learning about the basics of the vessel and line handling, things like that. And then you stand bridge watch. So you're up there as a freshman steering the ship. And then as you go up through the years, now you're a junior, sophomore, junior, senior, you have more responsibility and, the hierarchical ranking system and management, leadership, all that come into play. And eventually as a senior, you're learning how to pilot the vessel. So it's this great opportunity for leadership, for self-awareness, for self-confidence. really helps you as you're growing as from that 18, 19, 20-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a ship, it's as if you have a house in the ocean with a big family in it, and everybody's got a job someone's always scraping paint, someone's always applying paint, someone's always lubricating, all these things,
right?
Tying knots. There's just a zillion things to do. But are you guys delivering, like, is there like a cargo, or is there a mission for the actual cruise beyond your guys' training?
No. So on occasion we would take sort of charity shipments to some foreign port we were going to. Not always, but that was a possible function of the ship. I don't know that they do that now, but it is something that they did during that time. Other than that, the main focus is training. And usually now they do, instead of 3-month cruises, it's 2 months. And then they get what they call sea time in other ways at the academy. They have a simulator there now, which is an absolutely amazing piece of equipment. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but it's a 360-degree view. And when you're in the simulator at the academy, you feel like you're on a ship. So they've integrated that into the process. But the training's still amazing. They still go to cool ports. It's still an absolutely worthwhile place to go.
I have been in a 360-degree simulator, and one of the things that comes with those things is seasickness.
Right. Some people have that.
Yeah, we sat in a Humvee in a room with a 360. We drove the Humvee around, and one of the things we had to do is, if you got motion sickness, was take your foot and stick it out of the Humvee and on the ground next to it, on the stage that the Humvee was on. And that, for some people, and for me, I'm like, let me see how this goes, because I was like, whoa, I'm a little bit out of sorts. And you put your foot down, and for whatever reason, your brain's like, okay, I know what to do with this now. It was the craziest thing. Working on a ship is not the safest job in the world.
It really isn't. No. No, there's all kind of pitfalls there.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna absolutely hit your head on stuff. Absolutely. Sure. The ship might roll, many degrees left and right as you go through a storm and everything else. There's a lot of things that happen. I mean, you can't give an 18-year-old kid too much responsibility on a ship because they don't know the dance, right? And that's kind of how I look at these things that are systematic and have to be done. No matter if there's a storm or not, we have to go out and do it. You have to know the dance so that you're always in step with everybody else, if it's possible to do that. Can you expand on some of the dangers?
Sure. And there is some oversight there but you do have a lot of responsibility and trust, even as an 18-year-old. But yeah, some of the dangers are even just raising and lowering lifeboats, practicing those life-saving maneuvers are quite dangerous. There's firefighting on board. So you have to not only, maintain that firefighting equipment, but know how to use it. And there's constant drills for, the possibility of firefighting. There's man overboard drills because, of course, what are you surrounded by on the ship? And you've got to be prepared for the situation where you might have someone overboard, and then how to quickly respond to that. So yeah, all of those things.
When you're 18, even 19, you're young like that, you always have the expectation of everything's going to be normal. And for the most of the time on a ship, everything is normal, except for we all know you have to be, especially in your career as a firefighter, you're not worried about the normal days. You're worried about the days when 2, 3, 4 bad things in a row happen, and you're like, how in the world did we get to this place, right? And that's the whole thing. That's why you're wearing an inflatable device at all times. That's why what all these safety measures are, not for when everything goes perfect, but when everything goes to shit,
Right. Well, and it's so amazing to have a young person come into that sort of training and realize that you are going to be an integral part of, that potential life-saving maneuver. So if somebody goes overboard, you're going to be part of that process, and maybe launching a boat and getting out there after the person. Maybe you just throw a life ring for the person. Maybe you're manning the hose to put the fire out if there's a fire on board. So you're going to be a big part of that. So it's kind of amazing.
One of the things that you have to do in these kind of environments, and this is, I'm just likening it to combat because I know how this goes. There are days that are 36 hours long, and yeah, you're 18 and normally you get to go to bed and wake up and have a nice warm breakfast. But here we put the fire out, and now to keep the ship functioning, we still have to do repair work and cleaning and all these other things. Otherwise, yeah, exactly. Yeah. always something to do. And sleep happens, but a lot of times sleep can become secondary.
Right. Exactly. And that's one thing I learned when I graduated as well, was that you're out on the ship, and I was more on a coastal run working on oil tankers. But you could be, you stand 4 hours of watch, have 4 hours of overtime, have time off, and then you're back. So it's 4 hours on, 8 hours off, 4 hours, 7 days a week. But if the ship comes into port, let's say, in a day and a half, and it comes in at 2 a.m. and you just got off watch at midnight, you're going to be up again, helping to tie up that ship. And it could be 2, 3, 4 hours. And now you're back on watch again. So you're not having that normal sleep schedule. So that definitely prepared me for the fire service as well, being used to that kind of weird schedule. Yeah.
Because you guys definitely have weird schedules. I want to get to fire in a minute, but I wanted to stick with the shipping industry for a little while. So we don't expect there to be, and I don't know how tall you are, how strong, but that's not a service where you expect to see a lot of women around. Yes, there's women in the Navy, and yes, women can do it, but not when you started. It wasn't couldn't have been a common thing.
No, I wouldn't say it's common, and it certainly isn't common now. So yeah, it was not something that, or I'm sorry, we're talking about shipping currently, right?
Specifically.
Yeah, no. So there were, let's say at that time, 400 students, and there were maybe 40 women. And now I think the numbers aren't too dissimilar. So it's just not something that maybe calls out to a lot of women. I think that, there's always the thought of, well, how am I going to have a family life, and how's that all going to fit into that career? And they just don't have the knowledge, or it's not put forward that, yeah, you can make it work. Lots of people do. You can work on a boat. You can work more of a shoreside job. There's jobs where they're 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off instead of 2 months on, 2 months off. So there's all kinds of ways you can weigh it out.
Yeah, and of those 10% of people who are in school at that time, a lot of those people are not, like you said, they're not going to be, we'll call them frontline workers. They're not going to go on a cruise to go to wherever it is, around the Horn of Africa and all that. They're going to be, they might never even get on a ship, or they might, when they get on a ship, it's going to be tied to a dock, or there's a lot of ways to do that. But that's not what you did. You went out on the boats.
I did. I started out actually working. I think Eric, you got me my first. We'll say hi to Eric here real quick.
Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Hopefully this works.
Yeah, we're just talking about ships and stuff, man. It's good.
Yeah, he helped get me my first job, just working on a boat that was tied up alongside at the time it was Exxon dock, just a spill response boat, and just sitting there for several hours waiting for something bad to happen. And that was my first job. So then I also worked on tugboats after that in the Bay. Spent about a year doing that as a deckhand, and then finally got moved up to boat operator right around the time that I got a call from Keystone Shipping and went out on oil tankers after that. So
how many of the jobs on a ship, tugboat, tugboat have giant rope and everything, and that stuff gets wet. How many of those jobs are just not physically possible for a woman just because of the amount of lifting? It's the thing in the military is, a woman couldn't put a man on her back and walk any distance. And then here's the big surprise. Nobody does that. Nobody picks up a 300-pound human, which is what you have when you have all your gear on in the Army, and goes anywhere. It's always a 2-person lift. It just always is. There's every now and then 1 in 20,000 chance that you have to do that. But is the assumption correct that there are no jobs that can a woman do every job on that deck?
So in fact, now it's even better. So when I was there working on tugboats, they were called conventional tugs at the time. And so there was a lot of throwing lines and lifting and maneuvering lines around. And they could be, like you said, wet, heavy. The deck maintenance part is basic. Anybody can do that. But yeah, the line handling could be challenging. I'm not the largest person in the world, and I could do it. So it definitely was doable for most women. Now they have more tractor tugs out there that have, the lines are connected to winches, and they simply go up, a lot easier up onto the vessel. So things have improved in that realm, but everything was doable for me as a female.
Why would you enter that world, though? Why would you enter this world of being on a, it's just, we think of people that live on ships. We think of...
We all question that, Pete. We all question that. Why would we ever do that?
Why does anybody want to do this? Yeah, that's a good question.
God, honestly, well, at the time, I felt like, as far as going to the academy, I needed structure in my life. And I like that pseudo-military kind of lifestyle that looked appealing to me, but also just the excitement and the adventure of it. And going out on the ship just sounded amazing to me. I loved the idea of working on, for me, I chose oil tankers. I loved the idea of being busy every day. It's not just standing watch on the bridge like we were describing earlier. When you get into port, now you're in the cargo control room managing the loading and the discharging of that liquid product. So that was exciting, stressful and exciting job. There's the line handling aspect, the voyage planning, everything that went along with it. It just was appealing to me, and I liked that environment.
I haven't let Eric ask any questions at all. So, Eric, let's talk a little bit about, and I want to close out the shipping industry stuff here in a minute, but what do you want to talk to Jennifer about? What do you want to bring up or remember or anything like that?
Well, there's two things. One, I don't know if you guys touch base on the fact that she was a wildland firefighter before she was a Hoglund firefighter. So that would be interesting to explore a little bit. And that was actually pre-Maritime Academy, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jen.
Right.
And then the second thing is kind of a segue into this. You talked a little bit about, breaking into an industry that was male dominated and all that sort of thing. And you successfully did that in every way. But your new project is talking about getting people in underrepresented neighborhoods into police, fire, EMS, and maybe kind of explore what you anticipate those hurdles are going to be for those kids moving forward, and the lessons you've learned that you can maybe convey to them to help them move forward into what seems to be a fantastic career opportunity for any of them that want to choose to do that. So, two-parter.
Right. Well, yeah, I did. So just out of high school, I needed a summer job, and my best friend and I decided we wanted to be wildland firefighters. So it seemed like a good thing to do, to spend the summer right before going to the Maritime Academy. Again, a little outside the norm, maybe, for your typical summer job. But again, it sounded exciting. It sounded adventurous. And I liked the professionalism of that career. And again, that pseudo-military aspect of it. So I did a 2-week training for the U.S. Forest Service and went on a couple wildland deployments before starting the academy. So that was great training for me. And again, we talked about responsibility, Pete. And as an 18-year-old, you're out there with, I was on a hand crew of 20 people, and, you'd go and hike up several miles into these, big conflagrations and just start digging fire line and right up next to this massive fire going on. It was kind of amazing for a kid coming right out of high school, but really good experience. And especially just before I went into the academy with all that responsibility that was going to be expected of me. It was a good, I'm glad I did that. It was a good choice.
For someone that wants to work all the time and be busy and is already working on oil tankers, you make a big hard shift over to the fire part. What prompted that move? Because you could stay your whole career. I mean, there's people that do stay in that career and they love it. So what changed?
Yeah. And I still maintain my license in the Merchant Marine, but I thought about having a family. And for me at the time, I wanted to be a little closer to home. And because I did choose oil tankers, I was going to sea for 75 days at a time. And I thought, let me explore an option that is just as appealing to me in regard to structure and, excitement, but also the possibility of giving back to the community. And I always liked the maritime or marine firefighting aspect of the job in the Merchant Marine. And so I started looking into the fire department and, exploring those options. I got myself trained as an EMT, and then started testing all over the state for that position. But the main focus was that I wanted to be closer to home if I had a family. And I did continue working in the Merchant Marine, even in the fire department. I went out on training cruises for the Maritime Academy as an instructor. And I did probably 4 of those and did the Fleet Week cruises. And so I tried to maintain a connection there.
And don't forget, you did some work with a fireboat as well.
Yeah. So we had a fireboat when I first came in the fire department. And then unfortunately, due to budget cuts, the fireboat stopped being a frontline piece of equipment for Hoglund Fire Department, but it did need to be maintained and operated on occasion. So I was one of the few people who had the license and the ability to operate the boat when it did go out of service. So I did maintain qualifications with that and that boat, which is still there today, but still not a frontline piece of equipment.
How often is a firefighting boat needed? I mean, is that something that happens once every 10 years? And do you have someone standing at the ready to pick up a crew of firefighters? I don't know. How does that work?
So we did. So we had a station 2 down at the Jack London Square waterfront. It's still there, and the boat's still there. As I say, we do have fast rescue boats as well. So those are in operation. But the fireboat was staffed full time with a full crew and ready to go at a moment's notice. And it really depends on the mission of the fireboat. So those have changed over the years to just, all we do is take it out for fighting a ship fire, to being a little more diverse in most ports. So they're out there doing port security. Sometimes they're out there just checking around and, making the rounds of the port. You don't need a big gun on the bow of the vessel to do port security, right? You just need eyes on. There's people who fall in the water. There's vehicles that go in the water. There are, if you're over in Sausalito Fire Department, for example, there unfortunately are people who jump from the bridge. And so there's rescue options. There's patrol options. There's all kinds of other things that the boats do.
How often is there an actual fire that is fought by a boat like that? Whether it's, and how many are there in the Bay Area? Just out of curiosity.
There's quite a number. Now, the only ones of any significant size are San Francisco. San Francisco has 3 fireboats currently. One of them is relatively old, but they have 3 larger fireboats. Ours was only 60 feet, which is relatively small for fireboats these days. Typically, you're looking at 90, 100-foot boats, especially in LA, Long Beach, Seattle, those kinds of ports. And Hoglund, honestly, needs to have a vessel of size, because all of the container ships for this area come into Hoglund, not into San Francisco. There really isn't any commercial shipping traffic that goes into San Francisco other than cruise ships. So Hoglund does have the port and the need for a fireboat.
And I guess just with current events, let me ask you about this. What do you think about a container ship full of a zillion luxury cars being on fire in the middle of the ocean? I mean, can you even do anything about that? Or is that a lost cause? Get everybody off the damn thing.
I think it ended up being a lost cause. It's pretty, at least you can get the crew off. That's, you always want to focus on life saving, but once those cars get going, unless you can get in there and do a direct attack right at the center of it, it's going to be pretty difficult you can't do a surround and drown kind of thing, because the vessel's going to sink. You can try to close off the compartment and use, like a halon or a, CO2 type extinguishing method. But other than that, it's going to be pretty difficult to extinguish once that gets going.
And now with the batteries, they're really bad, right? So these electric cars, the batteries, it's not the same firefighting that they would have had back when you had vehicles on there with very little gas in them. This is a whole different animal now they're fighting, I assume. So You'd have to have a different tactic, I imagine, for that.
I think honestly, you're absolutely right, Eric. But even if it was just gasoline vehicles, once that gets going, it's going to be pretty, and it catches the other ones next to it. It's going to be pretty rough to contain that unless they can get it right away.
It's hell. You are not stopping it. Once it gets going, that thing is going to burn to the ground. It's not going to stop. The other thing about that is how I mean, it doesn't matter what the cargo is, any kind of cargo, but how does that fire start? I mean, how do a bunch of cars light on fire? Does that smell like an arson thing to you?
Boy, it could have been. I'm not sure of the particulars of that, but it could have been arson. It's always typically, I don't want to say always, it's typically an electrical issue, typically. So something with the battery and some wiring issue, and then it just starts the whole thing off.
That's crazy.
So
I'm going to go to the PD side, the FPD side, the fire department. That's what I want to say, fire department side, and ask some questions about that. So you decide to have a more stable life and live at home, and so you pick firefighting, which is a job.
Yeah. Well, especially the schedule. The schedule was, relatively appealing, except, you are gone, and now it's actually even more difficult. We'll get into that, I'm sure, in a second, with staffing difficulties, and you're there for a lot longer. But when I signed on with Hoglund, it was one day on, 2 days off, meaning 24 hours on, 48 hours off. And yeah, you could be up all night long, running calls of any kind. But, in my mindset, you can do anything for 24 hours. If I know I'm going to go home the next day, I don't care if I'm up all night. So, that was my mindset.
Yeah. And then also, if a fire starts 2 hours before your shift ends, and that's going to be I don't know, how long's a fire call? Like a typical, like if there's an actual fire, something you couldn't just say, hey, I'm off, I'll see you later. I mean, how long do these things take?
Well, first of all, you are going to get relieved if the fire starts 2 hours before your shift ends. The other crew comes in, and then they go to the fire scene, and they change people out. But a fire, it could be a single story residential fire, just a bungalow fire that goes out within 10, 15 minutes. And then you're doing some overhaul. So let's call it maybe an hour, hour and a half. It could be anything from that to something that lasts for, hours and hours, because it's a high rise or it's a warehouse or something like that. So hard to say.
I'm leaving room for you, Eric, so I don't ask.
Oh, well, I thought you had something there. Sorry about that. So tell me a little bit about, so you went into this, you went to Hoglund Fire right away, or was there another department in between?
No, I tested all over the state. It took 2 years to get hired, and I did training, like I mentioned earlier, for EMT. I went and got my fire science courses toward an associate's degree in fire science. Just anything to make myself more qualified. I certainly got myself into good physical shape for taking the physical agility exams. Tested everywhere from Long Beach. All the way up north and into the Bay Area and around. And it took, I got on Oakland's list right away, but I was farther down. They hired 3 academies in a row. So I didn't get picked up right away. And honestly, I started taking classes for law enforcement for my master's degree in criminal justice while I was waiting. So I was doing a lot all at that time, and then finally got picked up with Hoglund in 1998.
Because that's a big city with a big department, and you're kind of thrown in brand new into, even though you had plenty of experience in the shipping world, it's still, you're the bottom, right? You're the newbie, and you got to work your way through a pretty big department. Talk a little bit about that, especially coming in as a woman into what may be changing at the time, but a man's world at the time, which is
right.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Hoglund is one of those departments that's unusual in that it's got a lot more diversity than other departments around. So I happened to come in, like I said, it was the third class of 3, and there were 6 women in my class. So about 30 of us, and 6 of us were women. That's pretty unusual. So that was, for me, I didn't necessarily at the time know, wasn't thinking too much about, oh no, what if I'm the only woman? I really wasn't thinking along those lines. I just wanted to get in there, do the job, do my best. And I felt like I could do well in that job. That was my whole mindset. So yeah, the academy was 3 months, finished with that. And then for every department has a name for probies, but for Oakland, they call them new kids. So I was a new kid firefighter, 18-month probation. And I just, I did everything that I was told to do, tried to go above and beyond, tried to give 110%, realizing at the back of my mind that, oh, they're looking at me a little differently, but not necessarily caring. I just wanted to do the best job I could do, have fun with it, make some great friends. It's a family environment. You want to be as competent as you can for your fellow firefighter, but also for the public. And that was my whole way of thinking. So I think it paid off in the end. I feel like I was relatively respected as a firefighter and was able to promote up through the ranks. And to this day, I have some very close friends who came from that job. So it's a very much a family environment, and that's exactly what I was looking for.
I love that you did it, the journey. We can't go any further without mentioning a fellow Venetian female firefighter. Becky Brown was just an elite athlete in college, went to UCSB, and when the WNBA was first starting, they're like, "Hey, why don't you come and play basketball?" And she's like, "You know what? I'm already doing incredible things, in the fire." And I believe it's Santa Barbara Fire Department, but she's like, "I'm already doing incredible trailblazing things." So we got to make sure we mention Becky, because she also went on this journey and has had a long career now in the fire departments. It's incredible. Did you feel like you were being a pioneer? Like, were you like, this is, I'm doing new things? I don't know how many lieutenants in the Oakland Fire Department happened before you that were female.
Oh gosh, I'm not really sure about that. I think women started coming into the department. I want to call it 1980 is when they had their first women come in, but those were one at a time, maybe per class. So pretty spaced out. Probably wasn't until late 80s, early 90s when they had, quite a number of women come in. And then however long they stay, that's all over the place. But I wasn't thinking pioneer at all. I was just thinking, I want to be a firefighter and serve the public and do the best job I can. And yes, I am a woman, but I want to be just as qualified as the person next to me.
So I can attest. Like, I went to school with Jen, and we sailed together on the academy ship, and did some. We've been friends for a long time. I never once thought of Jen as anything other than a shipmate that is doing her job better than I was in many ways. She's probably way more experienced in a lot of things than I am. What I can see from this progression of this interview or kind of talk here is that you were kind of setting yourself up for this big long haul adventure. You weren't sure where the adventure was going to go, so you just kind of started doing things. You started the wildland, then you went to the academy, you wanted to go see the world, do that. Then you went on ships, tugs, tankers, then back to fire. And so there's this just domino effect that's happening. Now that you're coming into another phase where you're coming into starting, and I don't know if you want to give us a breakdown of what you're trying to do, but you're starting this nonprofit that is going to be helping people take that same journey, maybe not exactly the same journey, but start that domino, that first domino, and help them along their way. How is this whole progression of events in your life transferable in some way to these young people, young men and women that maybe, look, you rolled into Oakland, certain neighborhoods, and they didn't trust you. They didn't trust you at all. You were the fire department. You were not part of their group. And that's exactly the people you're trying to target, to say, hey, no, come join the fire department and make changes. So how would you help somebody make that first domino fall, or help them on that journey?
Right. Well, first off, part of as you're working in the fire service, especially in the bigger cities, you're working constantly alongside of the police. So law enforcement, whether it's Oakland police, whether it's the county sheriffs, CHP comes in quite often. There's housing authority. So a lot of law enforcement elements that you're always working alongside, calling on, assisting them, they assist us. So there's a close bond there with law enforcement and fire service. Also, I spent 11 years during my time with the fire department working for a nonprofit called Police and Fire the Fallen Heroes. And that experience, that volunteer experience, and working in many different levels of that nonprofit as a volunteer, that's what kind of got me thinking about more about giving back and how to give back. I certainly learned about how to start a nonprofit, board members, logistics, planning, everything that goes along with it. That particular one gave scholarships to families or children who are affected by a line of duty death. So a different element than what I'm doing right now, but certainly all about giving, all about public safety, and honoring those that had served the public. So I kind of got the idea from that and wanting to give back more, but in a different aspect. So yeah, I started, I'm looking at retirement from the fire department soon after I'm in my 24th year now, and I'm looking at giving back to the community further. So I started Driven to Serve middle of last year. We developed a board of directors, people who are like-minded, and trying to get underrepresented youth and veterans into public safety careers. So I had mentioned earlier the issue of staffing. I just touched on it. And so when I came into the department, things were pretty even keeled, but over the years, staffing across public safety agencies, fire and law enforcement and EMS is really at a critical low. So for whatever reason, pandemic, bulk hiring at one time where everybody's leaving all at once, disinterest in the careers in general, that's going on nationwide, but my focus is California. And so this is the perfect time in my mind to bring in a more diversely representative group and wanting to staff those public safety agencies with people who, public safety representatives are people who come from our own communities. It's you and me. It should be representative of those communities. And so that's what our focus is to staff those public agencies with people who represent the community a little more accurately.
There's a lot of work in staffing things. I know Oakland PD perpetually has a banner saying, hey, we're hiring, right? And because part of the thing that happens is they've got to push a lot of people through because you get certified and then you go, you know what? I'd rather work in Benicia than Oakland. And so Oakland basically there's the same thing. I mean, I'd rather work at a fire department in sleepy little Benicia as opposed to Oakland, unless I was young and wanted the action,
Yeah. And there's always going to be those individuals, and that's what they're hoping for. It's the action. It's maybe the community that you want to work in. Maybe you're from Oakland. Maybe you like the idea of working in a bigger city. Maybe you want to work in San Francisco, Sacramento, or maybe Benicia, but it's all what's appealing to people. And yes, Oakland does have an issue with turnover in that maybe they have individuals who start out there, they get that, great qualifying experience of seeing a lot of different things, and then they move to the smaller department. So those are all issues that first responder agencies are dealing with all over the place.
One of the other aspects I want to kind of back out, kind of come in from a different angle on the same topic is obviously firefighting has changed dramatically in the last 30 years while you've been up and coming, and now 24 years later through your career, there's new technologies, there's new ways to fight fires. And there's also fire prevention at a higher level, I would think. How has the industry evolved? And then do we really need as many firefighters around? Or could we break off some of the mission and give it to some kind of privatized organization that does less than fire response? How has the industry changed and where do you see it going?
I've heard that argument for years of, do we need the fire department? Do we need as many individuals? Fire prevention, the new technologies aspect. There really isn't, from my perspective, a lot of change in technology. The equipment that we operate, as far as the fire engines, fire trucks, the technology has changed a little bit on those. The type of hose we use has changed size and dimension a little bit. The weight of the water is still the same. There's still the large fires going on. There's still the warehouse fires. There's still rescues. There's still all the same elements when I first came in the department are still there. And still the need for just as many firefighters, if we're just talking about the fire service, as there was 24 years ago when I came in. So, and there's so many different elements that the fire department participates in besides just firefighting. There's a public interaction element, schools, just being out there to help the public in any way you can. Certainly medical calls are rising. I mean, you've probably heard that that's a good 80% of our calls are medical. So there's always going to be a need for that and to be first on scene for something like that.
I know in Benicia, there are half as many firehouses as there were when we were kids. Is that because we've gotten better at managing a place like Benicia? Or, I mean, we have less, not more. How does that work? And again, where are we going? Like, are we going to get more efficient with these things? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
I think it's unfortunate. So I can tell you that having less firehouses in Benicia and more people in Benicia, you're just putting more work on less individuals. So they're doing more. More is required of them. I can't speak to the number of responses that Benicia goes to, but I can tell you that in Oakland, certainly over the last 30, 40 years, the firehouses have diminished, and that's a constant struggle. I can tell you that our operating area for each individual firehouse is quite wide, and it's difficult to be there in a timely manner when people call. And then there's frustration about, well, why weren't you here earlier? What was the delay? Maybe we were on a medical call when the fire hit off, and now you're having companies from farther out responding. And so people don't see the background of all of those things. There's a lot of dynamics going on. We've had at least 3 times in the last 24 years that I've been in the department, we've had what we call brownouts. So there are budget issues where we've had to close a station for a day and move those individuals to a different station. And, medicals, fires, responses are needed from that station that's closed, and there simply isn't a response and it's delayed. So all of those things affect the community. And it's a little hard to explain, on an individual basis when they're complaining about it. And it's hard for us to get out there and say, well, this is why, this is what happened. It tends to all come down to budget.
It's not an easy job. We had a lady on the show, and she was an Oakland Police Department officer. And at one point she realized she was the only police officer free in the entire city. And so she's like, I have to take on only the kind of calls that I can manage by myself. And that means if you're getting robbed, you're going to have to wait, because she can't go into that thing. And you guys surely must experience this where it's Oakland, it's complex. And yeah, you call an alarm from another station, but like you said, maybe they're 25 minutes away before they can get there because, again, it's hard to get around fast in Oakland. A lot of Oakland doesn't have freeway accessibility to it or anything.
Sure. And it depends where the call is. And there's also specialized pieces of equipment that may be required. And most structures of fires, of course, most people may not realize this, but require not only a fire engine with the water, but also a truck. Well, Oakland only has 7 trucks, and they're spread all over the city. And so those pieces of equipment, when they become occupied or break down or out of service for some reason, or simply close down, the response becomes longer. And the possible jeopardy to life becomes real. because when we're in a fire, for example, and we don't have a truck on scene, cutting that hole in the roof or allowing for ventilation or doing a search, it jeopardizes lives.
How many, in a perfect world, not that we ever have that, but how many firefighters do you need on call, ready to go in a city like Hoglund to manage whatever is going to come up? Like if you could just say, hey, we need no matter what, 150 people ready to go at a moment's notice.
So Hoglund in particular has 25 stations, and we have a different equipment at each station. So a single, what they call a single house in Hoglund would be just an engine company. And there's 4 individuals staffing that fire engine. So you have a driver, an engineer, an officer, and then a paramedic firefighter and an EMT firefighter on that engine. So some stations have an engine and a truck. So that would be minimum of 8 individuals, sometimes 9. Our downtown companies have 5 people on the truck. So it depends where you're at. But you figure 25 stations and anywhere from 4 to 8 to 9 people per station. So that's our staffing level there.
But where would you want it to be? Would you want it to be double that to manage the work that you guys get?
It's not so much more at any particular station, because our minimum staffing on having 4 on an engine or a truck is absolutely critical for the work that we do at any given time. But what we do need, and what our new fire chief is looking at, is expanding the number of stations. Mm-hmm. So like I mentioned earlier, the response area for some of the stations is quite wide and takes a while, and depends on congestion levels as well. If it's all surface streets you're commuting on and it's a congested time, it could be a minute. So the farther out you got to drive, the longer it's going to take.
This problem that Eric was talking about, and that you've mentioned, the lack of trust for the institution, I've watched with my own eyes. I've watched Hoglund become what I would call a feral city, where it can be dangerous for anybody to be any kind of responder, not just because it's a fire. There's just a lot of anger and rebellion in the city. But that's just my point. I don't live there, I don't operate there. I just know when I drive through and I'm like, man, there is a lot more stuff going on here that indicates a lack of governmental trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think we've all had our share of difficult experiences, and how that comes about. Who knows how this lack of trust occurs? But yeah, I think we've all been affected by it, and you just try to do the best job that you can as a public service representative. You try to express that to the community. You try to be a good person. You try to put on a good face and have the public realize that you're there for them, and this is for them, and you're responding for them. And that's the only way to beat it, is to kind of make sure that you're being appropriately representative out there in the field.
And so when you start thinking about bringing in the next generation of firemen and firefighters and police officers and EMTs and all these first responder positions that need to be filled as you retire, and it's a constant flow. How do if I'm 18 years old and I'm watching this, or I'm 17 years old and I'm watching this podcast, and I don't really have an idea of what my path might be. Do I have to go to a 4-year school? I mean, you obviously did. Do I need to get? Would a junior college be enough? Do I need to just go to find an academy and I'm in pretty good shape and I'm going to do? I mean, what is the steps? Because I feel like a lot of times, and having my own kids that are graduating high school, and we're just trying to navigate getting my daughter into college, and I don't know what to do because there's a mass of internet and things. It's very different than when I was going to school. So I'm learning. They're obviously learning. But what is the steps? What are the first steps, second step, third step? Maybe just get them on the path.
Right. So I'll tell you, when I came in, I had no idea what I needed to do to get that job and that position. And it took a lot of research. And we really, the internet really wasn't out there at the time. You really couldn't even jump online and figure it out. You kind of had to make phone calls and ask people directly. But it was a mystery. And I don't think a lot has changed today. I think being 18 years old, and let's say I want to be in law enforcement, or I want to be a firefighter, I want to be an EMS, I don't know what the steps are. And you can go online and look at an individual department, and those requirements could be different than the next department than the next. So that's sort of part of our short-term mission, is making the connections between agencies, between colleges, between high schools, workforce development boards, education, local education agencies, making those connections to make things easier for the high school student coming out of school. Pathways. It's all about those pathways and those connections and those relationships. Our long-term vision is what I find to be pretty exciting, and it really is gaining some ground, in that we would like to see throughout the state of California public service classes offered in high schools throughout the state. And the reason this would be incredibly beneficial would be twofold, in that you could have students not only, thinking about those potential careers, like vocational type training for those careers, even if they weren't going to consider those careers, at least they would be more informed about what's involved in those careers, whether it's law enforcement, fire service, EMS. At least they're learning about all the aspects of it, the ins and outs of it. They're possibly, going on tours of police stations, firehouses, EMS facilities, and they're getting a more broad view of how things work. So go ahead, Pete.
My external point of view on these things, when you look and you talk to young folks, and every year I go back to Benicia High and I talk to the seniors before they graduate, and I don't ever see folks raising their hand saying they want to be a firefighter, right? It seems to me that, it falls into the category of, I'm going to play music for a living. And the parents are like, whoa, boy, this is going to, so like in Fire Academy, here's what I believe. And I'm not saying this is accurate. This is what I believe. It's damn near impossible to get a job. You have no control where you're going to work. It's going to cost you $10,000 to go to the Fire Academy, and it's going to take you 2 to 3 years to get this process done. That's what I believe, right? That's the norm on the outside world. And that's how far we are apart, because you're shaking your head no, and I'm like, absolutely true. Like,
So there's a lot of, so there are barriers. There are barriers to the average individual. And especially when you talk about underrepresented groups, there are training barriers, there's financial barriers to you, besides the fact that you might not even realize that those options are out there. If you do want to go into the fire service, for example, there are financial barriers to you. So you do need to, in some cases in Oakland, for example, you technically just have to be 18 years old and have an EMT certification. Okay, well, let's just say that that's all you need. That doesn't make you the most viable candidate, but it's a baseline. Well, how do you get your EMT certification? You have to go to maybe a junior college, some kind of training institute. How much is that going to cost? It's going to cost you about $1,000, and that doesn't even count, materials or transportation or other equipment you might need, not to mention time to put in. So just getting that minimum level is going to cost you some money and some time and some effort. And then there's the testing following that. So there's a national test that you have to take that costs money. So you might have to pay for a live scan to apply for the job. And there's all these financial barriers. So a lot of people don't realize what it costs to become qualified for one of these jobs. And that's kind of where our short-term mission comes into play, is that we don't want those barriers to affect individuals who may want those careers. So
some of that live scan stuff is a simple thing for someone that has money, but if you're poor, it's impossible. It's one of those impossible problems. And then also the maze to get through that, like, what's the next step? Okay, and if you don't have someone to mentor you, boy, that could be tough.
Yeah, and a lot of agencies require you to have a CPAP or a standardized physical exam that you have to come in with. That costs these tests can cost anywhere from $75 to $100. If you're getting, let's say you're getting a paramedic certification, that can cost you from $3,000 to $10,000. Then you get the actual certification exam. That's $100. all of this adds up and it's daunting. You think to yourself, okay, do I really want to go through this? And so that's kind of where we come in short term.
No guarantee of a job either. You can get all the way certified, and then, it's just the process takes the life out of the job for you.
Well, but I'll tell you, if you do get those certifications, staffing, they're looking for a lot of people, and they're willing to, make allowances for people that maybe are lacking some training and get you into an organization like this one where maybe you can get some assistance. But they're reaching out, law enforcement, fire service agencies, EMS, everybody's reaching out to get whoever they can because of these all-time staffing issues that we're having. I'll tell you, the long-term vision, though, is another solution to what we're talking about. It gets the kids thinking about these careers earlier, and you can get training in high school to help bridge that gap we were just talking about. So I'm going to give you a great example. I was talking to Berkeley. So Berkeley High School has a fantastic model. They have what they call their career pathways model. It's not called vocational training anymore. Career pathways directly in the school. They have electives for fire and law enforcement. As a junior year for fire service major, you are trained in like an intro to fire science class. Senior year, you're getting your EMT certification. That's groundbreaking stuff. So you get out, you could work on an ambulance, you could apply for a number of large city fire department jobs you've already got it over with and you're 18 years old. That it's just such it opens a lot of doors for you. For the law enforcement aspect, as you can imagine, that wasn't initially widely accepted, especially, in Berkeley, where they've had a lot of issues in the past. They didn't want the law enforcement aspect of that training, but they went ahead with it. It's a modified, I think it's called, law and social justice, I think, is that track for the high school students. It started in 2019. It's been so widely lauded and accepted by students, by faculty, by administrative officials. The kids go out, they visit courtrooms, they visit stations, they have people come in and speak. So it's more of a broad view of law, and there's a give and take. They're allowed to ask questions. They're allowed to bring in, current politics and have discussions about that. And a lot of the students, let's say there's 50 in the class, there's a great article about it. They're considering now careers in law where they may never have, because they saw that wider view of things. They were able to ask questions and make it make sense for them instead of just seeing what's on the news, instead of just seeing what's on social media.
Or what their friends said, or some of the disinformation of, hey, look, I'd like to be a firefighter or a police officer, but I ran with a rough group when I was in 15, 16 years old. That's all going to show up on my background and I'm never going to get accepted. That kind of stuff is not necessarily true, but it's in their mind that they've been disqualified before they ever got a chance to start, right?
Sure. And so having them get that training earlier in life allows them to realize, oh, you know what, this is something I'm interested in. I'm 16 right now. Let me make sure that I stay on, a straight and narrow track. And you're in these classes and they're talking to you in those classes about how to proceed forward once you get out of high school, what the steps are, how you may want to proceed. Maybe you want to be a lawyer. Maybe you want to be a police officer. Maybe you want to go into the fire service. Maybe you want to be a wildland firefighter. Maybe you want to be CHP. All those things are discussed in the class, and you're getting an earlier shot at learning about that, but also about how to keep yourself on the straight and narrow track to even access those jobs.
I don't want to conclude this without telling the story of your MythBusters.
Oh gosh,
we got to cover that because it's fascinating, and we all love the MythBusters.
Yeah. So I had a little bit of a run of bad luck there with a couple of traumatic accidents back to back in my career. This was around 2007, 2008. I The second one was a little more traumatic, but I was an engineer, so driving the fire engine at the time, but I was allowing somebody else to do that job, and I was the firefighter for the day. So we got what came in as a car fire in the middle of the night, and it actually upgraded to a house fire because the car was right next to the house. So we pull up, I get a line out there charged with water. We hear an explosion. And we thought it was a tire exploding because that's pretty common. It turned out to be part of the bumper exploding. It's dark, we can't see, and the bumper had exploded and flown 50 feet in front of the car. So still thinking it was a tire, I moved in front of the vehicle because the house was on fire and I had to put that out. And it was at that point that there was a second explosion. It was the other half of the bumper that flew off, and it just crushed my left leg. That's the tib fib. So it hit both legs, but only broke the one, and it crushed it into, they said, over 20 pieces. So I went down. It was a pretty scary experience. I spent 5 days in the hospital. They were talking about skin grafts and stuff, but I lucked out with that. I was in pretty good shape at the time, which helped. But yeah, that was a rough experience. I did go back to work after 11 months. So that was amazing, and I'm thankful for that. But yeah, MythBusters picked that up, and they tried to recreate it. This was in Dublin, at the sheriff's facility in Dublin. They tried to recreate it, and they kind of went about it all the wrong way. But it was fascinating to be part of that. I got to be over there watching them, and it was kind of cool.
How common is that's a career-threatening injury, no matter how you look at it, right? Your tib fib. I mean, that's going to bug you for the rest of your life. At some point, it's going to come back, right? And be a problem. How often is that happening to firefighters?
And I actually just had a knee replacement a few months back because of that. Finally, like you said, wear and tear. But yeah, so it's not overly common. This was a late 80s Volvo, so it had just all the right setup for that kind of thing to happen. But typically, what you hear about are the struts in the hoods of the vehicles or the hatchbacks that have the fluid in them that, expands and explodes. So those are things that do happen relatively often. So you have those kind of dangers. Yes, the bumper does occasionally happen. It certainly never happened in Oakland Fire Department that I had ever known about. And then now you have the electric vehicles with all those kind of issues. So there's always something to look out for. There's a lot of dangers involved, but that's part of what you take on, and it's in the back of your mind, but it's not in the forefront. Certainly, you're just out there trying to get your job done.
Yeah, I mean, this brings to mind like my combat action thing. Once you put your foot off the camp, you accept. You've already gone past the fear part. It's just time to do a job. And yes, people get hurt, people get killed, but we're going to go do our job. We're going to look out for each other. We're going to mitigate the risk as much as possible. And knowing that someday, sometime, someone we know is including us, can get hurt really bad. And it's just part of it. And that's why we got to say thank you for doing this. You and your peers, you guys are heroes. You go out and it doesn't matter what it is. You don't know what you're walking into, and you just kind of say, I don't care. I've got an axe. I've got this oxygen tank. Oh,
yeah. And, Pete, you've mentioned the military a couple of times. There's a lot of similarities between the military and public safety personnel. The military, I like to think, take care of us outside of the nation, typically externally. And we've got our public safety professionals taking care of us inside. And so there's a lot of similarities in our job and what we do and what's expected of us. And I think it's worth mentioning.
And this is where I really quickly got to get on my soapbox. We talked about firefighters and EMTs and cops as being first responders. The first response is self-response. And then, buddy response. They're the ones that get there first. So when you see something happen, go lend a hand until the professionals can get there, whether you're doing whatever it is, helping. The last time I jumped out of my car, I was doing something like this. There was a lady trying to put gas into her car at a busy intersection, and she was stuck at a left turn lane. And it's just super dangerous for her to stand out there and just get out there and lend a hand or wave cars away or anything like to get involved. I don't think do anything rash, but I am saying be prepared to help someone because, that first response is often somebody else. I want to close it up. So, Eric, I'm going to let you have a word, and then we'll kick it over to Jennifer.
Well, ironically, you brought up wanting to be Jen. Actually, I've seen her. She walks around with a Scott air pack on her back and an axe. That's just how she rolls every day. So she's always ready. So that's fantastic. Thanks for coming on, Jen, and teaching us a few things about what you did, what you're doing, because I think what you're doing is exciting. I think it's groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And if we can get more school districts to step up and take a risk, take a chance, and do what Berkeley's done and some other things, I think we could see some real lives changed with it. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and I just want to finish by saying that the first responders are a necessary part of our society. They're invaluable. We look to them every day in so many different things. And if a young person did choose to take on that career, it's more rewarding than you could imagine in many different ways. So I want to thank you, Pete, for having me on, and thanks, Eric, for co-hosting.